Hello everyone, I am Mrs. Tran, and we are making up the Borax Crystal Lab. Now for this lab, what we did was we went through a pre-lab section, so let's go through it. So for the pre-lab questions, you have to make some observations about pipe cleaners. It does have a lot of texture, and that's going to give it a high surface area. So that's the answer for pre-lab question 1. Lots of texture gives it a high surface area. For question 2, it says, to make the borax solution, we're dissolving borax in hot water. And part A is asking if this is an aqueous solution. And the correct answer is yes, because any aqueous solution uses water as the solvent. So for part B, what part of the solution is the solute? Well, what got dissolved? The borax. And then the part that's the solvent does the dissolving. That's going to be the water. And then 3, we're going to predict why we're using hot water to dissolve the borax. Explain your prediction using solubility to support your prediction. So with our hot water, especially for our solid solutes, the hotter the temperature of the water, the higher your solubility is, the more stuff you can actually dissolve in your warmer solvent. So by using hot water, we're able to dissolve more borax, so that, and the hot water gives us a higher solubility. So for the actual lab procedure, what we're doing is we are going to be making a saturated solution. We're going to try and dissolve as much of the borax into the hot water as possible at that higher temperature. And then what's going to happen is we are going to put our pipe cleaners in whatever shape we want to into the borax solution and let it sit overnight. As it cools down overnight, the solubility is going to decrease for that solution. And whenever solubility decreases, that means that the excess solute that got dissolved in the solution is going to precipitate or come out of the solution as a solid. And that's how we're going to be growing our crystals in our or on our pipe cleaners. So a couple of things to keep in mind. We have the recipe right here in procedure number 6. So if you want to do this at home, you can, along with adding some food coloring so that it looks a little bit more colorful. Let's see, it does say lower the snowflake, but in reality, it's whatever shape you want it to be. And then after we leave it overnight, again, because of precipitation happening, since we're decreasing the solubility, the excess solute that was dissolved at the higher temperature is going to come out of the solution, and it's going to settle and bind to the textures on the pipe cleaners. So, just to give us a visual of what can happen, so I made a triangular prism using the pipe cleaners. It didn't really keep the straight edge that I wanted it to, but the crystals have grown quite a bit on this structure. So that's what the borax crystals look like after they settled on the pipe cleaners. So underneath all this crystal is, or are 2 pipe cleaners. They are both white in color. And I had put a little bit of food coloring on this, but not a whole lot. But as you can see, the crystals are going to be a lot bigger than the borax powder. And I'll show you what the borax powder looks like in just a moment. But the crystals are almost look like glass. They've got straight sides to them. They've got a sharp edge, just giving it that crystalline structure, the crystal look to it. And if it wasn't for the pipe cleaner giving it that white sort of color, these crystals would be more of a clear sort of color. So these crystals are definitely a lot bigger than the borax that was in that we started out with, whereas the borax crystals we started with were white and powdery. The crystals that we have at the end of this are going to be smooth, but they have sharp edges and they are much bigger. Okay, and for the borax that we started with, it's more of a powdery substance. I'm not sure if you can see that very well from where you are, but it is a powdery substance. The crystals for the borax are a lot smaller than the crystals that I showed you just a moment ago on my pipe cleaners. So you can tell that there was a definite change that happened as we went from the borax solution, where these were the borax crystal, or sorry, the borax powder was dissolved, and then the resulting borax crystals that we made after letting it sit and cool down and change its saturation point. Okay, so that was post-lab question number 1. And for post-lab question number 2, did any crystals form on places other than the string? So that is a yes. And were any stuck to the cup? That's also yes. So I've got this other substance that I soaked, and it was using blue dye, but looking at the inside of the cup, all of that blue at the very bottom are borax crystals. So the crystals ended up settling wherever there was texture, and the inside of the styrofoam cup actually has quite a bit of texture to it. So the crystals were able to settle and precipitate out on the substance I soaked in the solution, but also on the sides of the cup, the insides, because of that texture. For number 3, what color would you predict if you didn't add any food coloring? Like I said earlier, the crystals are more of a glass-like structure, and they are clear whenever you don't add any food coloring, but also their color can be influenced by the color of the pipe cleaners. So if you answered clear or white because I used white pipe cleaners, you would be correct in either case. So for the most part, they are clear, but because they're clear, they are influenced by the color of the pipe cleaners or whatever it was you soaked in the solution. Question 4 is asking about the surface area or texture of the pipe cleaners and why that influenced our decision to use those instead of something smoother like straws. With the pipe cleaners, they have a higher surface area. That means that there's more places for the crystals to settle and precipitate out onto. So we're making more crystals by having more space for the crystals to form by using the pipe cleaners. Straws, on the other hand, they are a lot smoother. They don't have as much of a texture to them. And so because of that, they're not going to create any crystals. In fact, this straw was soaked in the same solution for the same amount of time, but there are no crystals on this surface. There are none whatsoever, and it was soaking for the same time in the same solution and everything, but no crystals formed on the side. And that's because, again, for the straw, it's got no texture, or it doesn't have texture. It is very smooth on its surface, and because it doesn't have that higher surface area, it's not able to allow the crystals to precipitate onto it, to form on it. So that's for A, the answer for A. All right, and then 5, if cold water was used, could the crystals have formed? Probably not, because with this lab, what we're trying to do is we're trying to have the solubility at a higher point to start with, but then we're cooling it down to a lower solubility, and then that difference in solubility allows the excess solute to settle out and precipitate as the crystals. But if we used cold water, that means that the cold water would have a lower solubility rate, and then if we let it sit overnight, it'll actually warm up instead. So the crystals would not have formed. We would have dissolved only a little bit of the borax, and then none of it would have settled out as crystals because we actually increase the solubility overnight because it warms up from being cold. So That does it for this lab. That is it completed. So I hope this was helpful and have a great rest of the day.